In the history of criminal justice, there are cases that end with a body, a confession, and a sentence that feels final. And then there are cases like this one. A young woman disappears. Her blood is found. Her child is recovered alive. Multiple men are convicted. Yet the most basic truth remains missing. There is no body, no grave, no final resting place. This is one of those cases. In 2010, a 25-year-old woman named Elisa Samudio vanished without a trace. Within weeks, investigators would conclude that she had been murdered. Years later, a Brazilian court would sentence a famous professional soccer player to more than 2 decades in prison for orchestrating her death. And still, to this day, Elisa Samudio's remains have never been found. That absence is not a footnote. It is the core of this story. Because when there is no body, the law must rely on fragments. A trace of blood inside a luxury vehicle. Conflicting testimonies from accomplices. Phone records that suddenly go silent. A child left behind in the care of strangers. And at the center of it all, a public figure whose fame complicated every step of the investigation. These horrifying stories are more than just cold headlines on the front page. They are sharp slices of the darkest corners of human nature, where the lines between power and responsibility, silence and truth, are dangerously blurred. And that is what makes them so compelling. To not miss any of the next files, any of the criminal portraits we are about to open, hit subscribe and the notification bell icon now. Because in the world of crime, the truth never gets old. The case of Elisa Samudio is not only about murder, it is about control, about denial, about how a private conflict escalated into a crime that shook an entire nation obsessed with soccer and celebrity. It is about a young woman whose life had been shaped by abandonment and abuse long before she ever met the man who would later be accused of ordering her death. Elisa was not born into safety. From her earliest months, her life was divided by violence, fear, and forced separation. Long before she became a name in court documents and television headlines, she was a child caught between parents whose marriage collapsed under cruelty and threats. That unstable beginning would follow her into adulthood, influencing the choices she made and the risks she took in pursuit of stability, recognition, and belonging. Years later, those paths would cross with Bruno Fernandes de Souza, a celebrated goalkeeper playing for one of Brazil's most popular football clubs. To fans, he was an athlete at the peak of his career. To sponsors, he was a valuable brand. And to Sato Elisa, he would become both a promise and a threat. What began as a secret relationship would soon turn into a legal dispute over paternity, money, and public exposure. And according to prosecutors, when those pressures collided, a decision was made that could not be undone. This is the story of what happened next, and of what still has not been found. Elisa Silva Samudio was born on February 22, 1985, near the Brazilian capital. From the beginning, her life unfolded in instability. Her father, Luis Carlos Samudio, was an architect. Her mother, Sonia Fatima, worked on a farm. Their marriage did not endure, and when it ended, the separation was neither peaceful nor safe. Court records and later testimony describe a household defined by cruelty. According to accounts provided by Elisa's mother, Luis Carlos was violent and unfaithful. The marriage deteriorated rapidly, and when Elisa was only 6 months old, her parents divorced. What followed was not a simple custody dispute, but a battle shaped by threats. Luis Carlos reportedly told Sonia Fatima that if she tried to take their daughter, he would not give the child to her alive. Faced with those threats, Sonia Fatima left the home without Elisa. It was a decision made under duress, one that would haunt the rest of her life. She started over by building a small farm and later entered a new relationship. In time, she gave birth to a son. For years, contact with her daughter was rare and restricted. Elisa remained with a father who exercised near total control over her life. When Elisa was 10 years old, her mother gathered the courage to act. Without Luis Carlos's consent, she took her daughter and brought her into a new household. For the first time, Elisa experienced a sense of normalcy. She bonded with her younger brother, her stepfather, and her mother. By multiple accounts, that year was calm and stable. But it did not last. Luis Carlos returned. Under renewed threats of violence, he forced Elisa to come back with him. The child did not want to return, but the power imbalance was absolute. From that point on, her adolescence unfolded in conditions that later investigators would describe as abusive and exploitative. As Elisa entered her teenage years, the control escalated. According to later statements, her father ordered her to entertain his friends in exchange for small amounts of money. These allegations would become a central element in understanding Elisa's later choices, not as moral failures, but as survival strategies shaped by long-term trauma and coercion. At 18, Elisa made a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She left her father's home and moved to Sao Paulo. She arrived with little money and no social network. What she carried with her was a dream that had formed years earlier. She wanted to become a model. More than that, she dreamed of marrying a professional soccer player. She loved the sport since childhood, and in her imagination, a footballer represented not fame alone, but security, recognition, and a family she had never truly known. Reality was far less forgiving. In Sao Paulo, Elisa attempted to enter the modeling industry. She attended castings, sought representation, and pursued opportunities. But consistent work did not materialize. The competition was fierce, and she lacked the protection and backing that often determines success in that world. As money ran out, survival became the priority. According to publicly available information, Elisa began selling sex to support herself. There is also evidence that she appeared in several adult films during this period. Her photographs were published in Brazilian magazines, not as a breakthrough into mainstream modeling, but as part of an industry that often blurs the line between opportunity and exploitation. These details would later be used against her in court and in the media. Her lifestyle was framed by some as proof of moral character. Investigators, however, treated it differently. They focused on how her circumstances placed her in proximity to powerful men and public figures, particularly within the football world. Through modeling contacts and social connections, Elisa began attending events frequented by professional soccer players. These gatherings were spaces where fame and anonymity coexisted, where athletes could socialize away from official scrutiny. It was in this environment that she met Bruno Fernandes de Souza. The exact moment of their first encounter remains disputed. Bruno himself offered multiple versions. At one point, he stated they met at a barbecue in 2008. At another, he claimed they met at an adult party organized by a friend. What is not disputed is that both were present at such a party and that their relationship began shortly thereafter. At the time, Bruno was already married. He was also a goalkeeper for Flamengo, one of the most popular football clubs in Brazil. His career was ascending, his public image carefully managed. Elisa did not enter his life as a partner with equal standing. She entered it as a secret. According to mutual acquaintances, Bruno and Elisa spent significant time together away from public view. He stayed at her apartment. They communicated frequently. While Bruno did not present the relationship as serious, there were claims that he promised to divorce his wife. Whether those promises were genuine or strategic remains unclear, but they contributed to Elisa's belief that the relationship could lead to stability. Then came the night that would later be described as pivotal. During sexual intercourse, Bruno's contraceptive reportedly broke. At the time, neither of them treated it as more than an inconvenience. Weeks later, it became the center of a legal and personal crisis. When Elisa informed Bruno that she was pregnant, the dynamic shifted abruptly. According to her statements, Bruno reacted with anger and denial. What had once been a private arrangement now carried consequences that extended into courts, contracts, and headlines. For Elisa, the pregnancy represented motherhood and a chance to build the family she had always wanted. For Bruno, prosecutors would later argue it represented exposure, risk, and the potential collapse of everything he had built. This was the point where two very different worlds collided. And from this moment forward, the story would no longer be about dreams, but about fear, control, and escalating conflict. When Elisa Samudio told Bruno Fernandez that she was pregnant, the balance of their relationship collapsed almost instantly. What had existed in secrecy now carried consequences that neither distance nor silence could contain. According to Elisa's later statements to police, Bruno reacted with hostility rather than concern. The pregnancy, in his view, was not a shared responsibility. It was a problem. Bruno was clear about what he wanted. He insisted that Elisa terminate the pregnancy. Investigators would later state that he attempted to persuade her through intermediaries, offering money and applying pressure designed to push her toward an abortion. Elisa refused. For her, the child was not leverage or a bargaining chip. It was the fulfillment of a desire she had carried since childhood, to be a mother and to finally build a family of her own. This refusal marked the beginning of a prolonged and increasingly volatile conflict. At the time, Bruno was a public figure with much to lose. He was married. He played for Flamengo, one of Brazil's most prominent football clubs. His career depended not only on athletic performance, but also on maintaining an image acceptable to sponsors, fans, and club executives. A public scandal involving an extramarital affair and a pregnancy threatened that carefully constructed facade. According to friends of both parties, Bruno's behavior changed. Communication became inconsistent. Promises were replaced by denials. And as tensions escalated, Elisa began to fear for her safety. In October of that year, Elisa took a step that would permanently shift the situation from private conflict to public record. She filed a police report accusing Bruno of attempted kidnapping and harassment. In her statement, she described him as violent and unpredictable. She also expressed fear that he might attempt to drug her food with substances intended to cause an abortion. These allegations were documented and submitted to authorities. Elisa did not stop there. She went public. Appearing on Brazilian television, she identified herself as Bruno Fernandez's pregnant lover. She spoke openly about the relationship, the pregnancy, and the threats she claimed to have received. For Bruno, this was the scenario he had most feared. The story spread quickly through tabloids and sports media, transforming a private dispute into a national spectacle. The legal response, however, was limited. The court issued a restraining order prohibiting Bruno from approaching Elisa closer than 300 meters. Yet the ruling reflected a troubling minimization of her situation. Because the relationship was unofficial and extramarital, the judge declined to grant additional protective measures. The court also failed to fully consider Elisa's pregnancy when evaluating the level of risk she faced. Elisa sought financial support from Bruno for prenatal care and nutrition. She argued that the costs were directly related to his child. Bruno refused. He denied paternity, asserting that Elisa's lifestyle meant the child could belong to any number of men. Elisa countered that after meeting Bruno, she had not been with anyone else. The dispute became both personal and legal, fueled by resentment, fear, and public scrutiny. In early 2010, Elisa gave birth to a baby boy at a hospital in Sao Paulo. Bruno paid for the medical expenses associated with the delivery. This gesture, however, did not signal reconciliation. He did not visit Elisa regularly. He did not acknowledge the child publicly. For the first 4 months of the baby's life, Bruno remained distant. Elisa, determined to secure her son's future, pushed for formal recognition. She wanted the child to carry his father's last name. She proposed a DNA test to resolve the dispute once and for all. Bruno agreed. This agreement appeared, on the surface, to mark a turning point. On June 4, 2010, Elisa spoke with friends and family for the last time. According to her lawyer, this was the final confirmed contact. Messages exchanged around that date suggested a shift in tone. Bruno reportedly agreed to acknowledge paternity and provide financial support. He offered to move Elisa into a new apartment, which he would pay for. In exchange, Elisa planned to withdraw the paternity and child support petitions she had previously filed with police. To some, it appeared to be a resolution. To others, it raised immediate concern. The following day, June 5th, Bruno played what would become his final match with his team before the case exploded publicly. After that, Elisa vanished. She did not contact her mother. She did not reach out to friends. She did not attend appointments. Her phone fell silent. Although Elisa and her mother had never shared a consistently close relationship, the absence was alarming. Sonia Fatima found it strange that her daughter had not called, especially after giving birth. She also noted that Elisa had never told her about the child in detail, which now seemed less like distance and more like fear. When days passed with no contact, authorities were notified. Police opened a missing person investigation. The case quickly leaked to the press. Given Bruno's celebrity status, public attention intensified almost immediately. Bruno was questioned. He acknowledged knowing Elisa but minimized the relationship. He reiterated that he was not the child's father and described the affair as brief and insignificant. At that point, police had no physical evidence linking him to Elisa's disappearance. Suspicion existed, but suspicion alone was not enough. For nearly 3 weeks, the investigation stalled. Then, on June 24th, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. An anonymous caller contacted police with a chilling claim. Elisa Samudio, the caller said, had been murdered. Her clothes had been burned. Her body had been hidden on property belonging to Bruno Fernandez. Despite the severity of the allegation, authorities faced a familiar obstacle. The judge overseeing the case refused to authorize a search of Bruno's home or farm without additional corroborating evidence. The concern was twofold: protecting due process and avoiding a public scandal involving a potentially innocent celebrity. Investigators adjusted their strategy. Rather than forcing a search, they sought information. On June 26th, police installed a listening device in Bruno's residence. Just hours later, an unexpected discovery altered the trajectory of the case entirely. Elisa's infant son was found alive inside the house. The child was in the care of a woman named Fernanda Castro, one of Bruno's subsequent romantic partners. Fernanda claimed that the baby had been handed to her by Bruno's wife, with instructions to look after him. To investigators, the explanation raised more questions than answers. Why was the child there? Who had decided his placement? And most importantly, where was his mother? Police brought Fernanda in for questioning. They attempted to question Bruno and his wife as well, but both refused to cooperate. Surrounded by legal counsel, they offered no substantive information. What had once been a missing person case was now something far more serious. The presence of the child suggested foreknowledge. It suggested planning. And it suggested that Elisa's disappearance was not accidental. The investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase. With Elisa Samudio's infant son found inside Bruno Fernandez's residence, the investigation shifted decisively. What had begun as a missing person case now carried the weight of a suspected homicide. Investigators understood that time mattered. Evidence, if it existed, could disappear as quickly as Elisa herself had. Fernanda Castro, the woman caring for the child, was taken into custody for questioning. Her explanation, that Bruno's wife had given her the baby to watch over, raised immediate concerns. Authorities viewed the transfer of the child not as an act of care, but as a sign of coordination among multiple adults who appeared to have advanced knowledge that Elisa would not be returning. On June 28th, a judge authorized a limited search of one of Bruno's properties. Inside the residence, police discovered women's clothing and diapers. While none of the items alone proved a crime, together they reinforced the suspicion that Elisa had been present there shortly before her disappearance. The most significant discovery came from Bruno's vehicle. Inside his Range Rover, forensic teams identified traces of blood. DNA analysis later confirmed that the blood matched Elisa Samudio. Sunglasses and black high-heeled shoes were also recovered from the car. Friends of Elisa identified the items as belonging to her. For investigators, this evidence established a critical link between Elisa and Bruno's movements during the period when she vanished. Despite these findings, the case encountered resistance. The judge overseeing the investigation initially ruled that the evidence was insufficient to justify a broader prosecution. On July 6th, the case appeared to stall. To the public, it looked as though a famous athlete might once again escape accountability. Behind the scenes, police continued their work. Their breakthrough came with the arrest of a 17-year-old boy named Sergio, Bruno's cousin. Sergio's detention marked a turning point. During interrogation, he provided a detailed account of events that investigators had only been able to theorize until then. According to Sergio's testimony, the disappearance of Elisa Samudio was not spontaneous. It was planned. Sergio told police that Bruno had grown increasingly desperate. Elisa's demands for child support, her public accusations, and the looming DNA test threatened to expose him further. He feared that additional revelations would destroy his career and reputation. In Sergio's account, Bruno decided that eliminating the source of that threat was the only solution. The plan, as described, involved multiple people. Bruno allegedly invited Elisa to one of his houses under the pretense of discussing financial support, the child's surname, and the DNA test. Because Elisa did not own a car, Bruno arranged transportation for her. The driver was his close friend, Luis Enrique Ferreira. Sergio was also present in the vehicle. Sergio stated that his role was to intimidate Elisa, not to kill her. He claimed he was given a firearm that was not loaded, intended only to frighten her into compliance. During the confrontation inside the car, Elisa resisted. A struggle followed. According to Sergio, he struck her several times until she lost consciousness. From there, Elisa was taken to one of Bruno's properties. Sergio told police that Bruno was waiting. He claimed that Bruno took Elisa's personal belongings and ordered them burned. He then instructed the group to remove her from the location and ensure that no evidence remained. Bruno allegedly left money behind as payment for those involved and traveled to Rio de Janeiro shortly afterward, creating distance between himself and what would follow. The next phase, according to the testimony, involved a man named Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, a former police officer. Investigators described Marcos as someone with experience in concealing crimes, a man known for ensuring that bodies were never found. Sergio claimed that Elisa was handed over to him at a secondary location. What happened next is described differently across various accounts. Sergio changed parts of his story more than once, and some details conflicted with official timelines. Investigators acknowledged these inconsistencies openly. They focused not on every claim, but on the elements corroborated by physical evidence and independent testimony. One point of contention involved an alleged phone call on June 8th, during which Elisa was said to have contacted a friend, claiming that Bruno had acknowledged paternity and that she was leaving the country. No such call was confirmed by her friends, and her lawyer maintained that June 4th was the last verified contact Elisa had with anyone close to her. Another disputed element was the location of Elisa's remains. Sergio initially suggested that her body had been buried on Bruno's property. Later accounts implied complete disposal elsewhere. Extensive searches yielded no bones and no definitive burial site. Investigators concluded that the men involved may have agreed never to reveal the true location. Despite these uncertainties, Sergio's testimony provided enough structure for prosecutors to act. On July 9th, arrest warrants were issued. Police went to Bruno's residence only to find it empty. Hours later, Bruno and Luis Enrique Ferreira voluntarily presented themselves at a police station. According to Bruno's attorney, surrendering was a strategic decision intended to protect his public image rather than risk a high-profile arrest at home. Bruno maintained his innocence. He denied any involvement in Elisa's disappearance or death. He acknowledged knowing her, but continued to reject paternity and responsibility. At the time of his arrest, he remained under contract with his football club. That changed quickly. On July 15th, as the case intensified and public outrage grew, his contract was terminated. Brazil watched closely. The trial became national news. Every development was reported across television, newspapers, and radio. The idea that a celebrated football star could be implicated in such a crime captivated the public. Many followed the proceedings not only to learn Bruno's fate, but to see whether Elisa's body would finally be found. Parallel to the criminal case, a separate legal battle unfolded over custody of Elisa's son. Initially, custody was granted to Elisa's father, Luis Carlos Samudio, as the last known guardian. Elisa's mother immediately contested the decision. She argued that placing the child with a man who had subjected Elisa to years of abuse would repeat the same cycle of harm. The court agreed. When Luis Carlos's prior conviction for the sexual abuse of a 10-year-old girl came to light, custody was revoked. Sonia Fatima, Elisa's mother, became the child's legal guardian. She requested a paternity test. The results confirmed that Bruno Fernandez was the father. In total, 6 men were arrested in connection with the crime. Marcos Aparecido dos Santos was sentenced to 19 years for murder and 3 additional years for concealing the body. Fernanda Castro received a 5-year sentence for withholding information and for her role in keeping Elisa's child. Bruno's wife was arrested but ultimately acquitted of all charges. Sergio, because he was a minor at the time of the crime, was not convicted. He remained the prosecution's key witness. In 2012, Sergio was killed. He was struck by a motorcycle after being followed from his home. The circumstances of his death were never fully clarified. With him died the only person who had provided a first-hand account of Elisa Samudio's final hours. The court would have to decide the rest without him. The sentence, the aftermath, and an unfinished truth. In 2013, after years of investigation, appeals, and public scrutiny, the Brazilian court delivered its verdict. Bruno Fernandes de Souza was sentenced to 22 years in prison for his role in the murder of Elisa Samudio. The conviction did not rest on a single confession or the recovery of a taim. Instead, it was built on a chain of evidence, blood found in his vehicle, corroborated testimonies, the recovery of the victim's child, and the conclusion that Elisa did not disappear by choice. For many, the verdict brought a sense of accountability. For others, it raised uncomfortable questions about how justice functions when the most basic proof, a body, is missing. Elisa Samudio's remains were never found. No grave was marked. No final farewell was possible. In 2017, the case returned to headlines once again. Following another appeal, Bruno was released from prison and, within days, signed with a new football club. The reaction was immediate. Sponsors withdrew. Public outrage followed. Less than 3 weeks later, his appeal was rejected, and he was ordered back to prison to continue serving his sentence. The court made its position clear. The presence of Elisa's blood in Bruno's car was sufficient to uphold the conviction. If Bruno wished to seek a reduced sentence, the judge stated, he would need to cooperate by revealing the location of Elisa Samudio's remains. He refused. In 2019, Bruno was granted a semi-open prison regime. Under this arrangement, he was allowed to leave prison during the day and return at night. He attempted to resume a football career, signing briefly with another club. That contract was later terminated, largely due to the restrictions of his sentence and the controversy surrounding his name. As of today, Bruno continues to maintain his innocence. He has divorced and remarried. He lives a life that, in many ways, resembles normalcy. He works. He spends time outside prison walls. And he insists that he played no role in Elisa Samudio's death. For Elisa's family, normalcy has never returned. Her mother, Sonia Fatima, became the legal guardian of Elisa's son after the court determined that Elisa's father was unfit due to prior convictions. The child grew up away from the man convicted of orchestrating his mother's murder. DNA testing confirmed what Bruno had long denied. He was the father. Yet even with a conviction, even with a sentence, something essential remains unresolved. Without Elisa's body, there is no physical closure. No confirmation of where her life ended. No place for mourning that feels complete. The death of Sergio, the case's key witness, only deepened that absence. Struck and killed under unexplained circumstances, he took with him details that may never be fully verified. What remains is a legal truth, not a complete one. The case of Elisa Samudio stands as a reminder that justice is not always clean or comforting. Sometimes it arrives incomplete, shaped by fragments rather than certainty. It shows how power and fame can delay accountability but not always prevent it. And it underscores the cost paid by those who never sought the spotlight but were pulled into it against their will. Elisa Samudio did not disappear because she wanted to. She disappeared because someone else decided she should no longer exist as a problem. Her name remains. Her child remains. And her absence continues to ask the same unanswered question. Where is Elisa Samudio?